Well, folks, a very warm welcome to the Healthy Gospel Church podcast. It's great to have you with us today, whether you're listening or watching on YouTube. And it's a genuine thrill to have one of my oldest friends with me. He's not so much a person as a brand. I'm talking about the wee flea himself, the Reverend David Robertson. David, welcome.
It's nice to be back, and it's true, I am one of your oldest and indeed only friends.
Absolutely. And in fact, when you were in Scotland, we used to talk almost daily. Now it's dropped to kind of, well, not quite annually, but monthly. Maybe.
Yeah. It was funny because when you were up in Smithton, I used to phone you in, and of course, in those days, you were just really Mr. Cheerful, not Mr. Grumpy. And, how are things? Oh, awesome, wonderful. We had the greatest day ever, like every Monday. You used to depress me with all of that. But it was great. It was great what happened in Smithton, and then I was in Brora and then Dundee. So
they were great days, days. Just to put folk in the picture, I was ordained in 1984, David in 1986, so he was 2 years behind me chronologically, but certainly not spiritually. And I started my ministry in Smithton in Inverness, a church plant, and David went up to Brora.
Yeah.
David, tell our listeners and viewers what the village of Brora is and how you ended up there. Is it what you expected?
No, my philosophy of life is like, from Proverbs, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. I had thought I was going to Fife when I finished at the college here. In fact, we were picking the curtains. Me and Annabelle were going to get married and everything. And then I won't go into the story, but that fell through literally at the last minute. And I got a phone call from Brora saying, we're going to have a meeting with the presbytery on Thursday. And if you happen to be passing the building, well, Brora's like the remote north. Yeah. So why was I going to happen to be passing? It would be good. And what happened was they went through the Presbyterian procedure. They did what was called an open call. And then someone said, I believe Mr. Robertson's in the vicinity. Because they weren't allowed to call me because I hadn't been. Yeah. And I went in. They'd signed a call, and my view was I was 24 years old. I was going to be the youngest minister in the Free Church. I wasn't expecting to get a call anywhere except Fife. And I just thought, no, we'll go. And we went. We were there for 6 years.
Great. Our main theme today is going to be revitalization. I think to a certain extent, all your congregations, you were in Brora, you were in St. Peter's, Dundee, now you're in Scots Kirk in Newcastle, New South Wales in Australia. Brora was a little bit different. The previous minister had been Ken Larter, who was by any measurement, a great minister. So, it wasn't classically in bad shape. It was beginning, it had some great ministries. But tell us a little bit about Brora and how you analyse what had to be done.
So, we could argue it wasn't in bad shape, but I think this is a story of Scotland over the past 40 years, Scotland's churches, and maybe other places, that if you seek to maintain what's there, you're done.
Yeah.
Because, you will remember this, of course, places like Brora had large adherent bases. So what we meant by adherent was people who expected to be buried in church, get married, bring their kids along to Sunday school, occasionally attend even. And it was from that group that people were converted. But what was happening, and I saw this in Dornoch and I saw this in other places, was the adherent base was absolutely collapsing. Now, the same thing happened in the Church of Scotland. But when you were reliant on the adherent base, we really then struggled with doing evangelism to those out with it. And it didn't matter if you're in a place like Brora and let's say 25% of the population, 500 people would say they were Free Church, although only 50 would attend, 40 would attend, whatever. But when that began to move away completely, you're in trouble. And we were in trouble in Brora. So I went there and I remember after 6 months, now as a young guy and, I'm quite shy and I don't like speaking my mind very much. But I remember saying to the elders, we need 10 new people per year to survive. And they looked at me and they said, but that's ridiculous. We've got 40 people. How do we need 10? I said, because on average over the past 10 years, 4 have died, 4 have moved away, and 2 have backslid. And I said, you are looking to get Christian families who are moving into the village. It's not going to happen. They're not going to. First of all, if they do come, they're going to go to the Church of Scotland. They're not going to come to us. Secondly, they're not there. We have to think about conversion growth. And whilst they were all extremely keen on that, there were like a significant number of churches. So I remember Sinclair Ferguson at Crieff saying once that if churches in Scotland had given up expecting to grow by conversion, and that if any church in Scotland had 6 new people from the world, as we say, in a year, it would transform that church. And that had a big impact. That was after Brora, but I remember thinking, yes, that was right. So I remember the elders saying, almost that's impossible. They didn't want to say it's impossible because you're good Calvinists, you've got to say God can do it. Mm-hmm. But they didn't expect God to do it. And then it just happened. I remember walking along the beach, and I always joke about not being a strategy. No, I'm not joking. I'm serious, actually, about not being a strategy numbers man. But I do think in numbers. And I remember walking along the beach, praying, and it wasn't like a charismatic prayer of faith, name it and claim it. It was just a wish. I said, Lord, I'd love to see one person converted per month. And for the next 18 months, that's exactly what happened. And in a small village, that has phenomenal impact, because you've got people who never went near church suddenly turning all holy, as people put it. And then, of course, you get attacked. I mean, by the time I was in my 6th month, I was in the middle of my 6th affair. I wasn't, sorry, but according to the village, there was all kinds of rumors and things. But the reality was, it's probably the nearest in my life, maybe once also in Dundee, that we came to what I would call a genuine renewal. And it was fabulous.
Would you say, whenever I think of Brora, I think of, Donald MacLeod, Ross MacLeod, these elders, or the women. There was a prayer meeting, I think, went on for years, every week for revival. Do you think that was operating in the background?
So there's 2 stories with that might help people. One was, there's this wonderful, godly woman called Barbara Mackenzie. Her son, Rory, was in here, actually.
OMF missionary,
OMF missionary. Barbara was my prophetess. I know you're not supposed to say that, but look, us Highland mystics, we can get away with it.
Yeah, nobody's listening to us anyway.
So Barbara would phone and say, I think you should go and see somebody, and she'd name them, and I'd go. And I just absolutely loved Barbara. She was really quite remarkable. But one day she called me round, and I always went. When she phoned, I went. And she said, David, we have been praying since the 1950s for revival. And she said, I've just realized we've had it. I said, what do you mean? She said, we've seen hundreds of people converted over that period of time. We've seen, I think it was 10 people go into the ministry. Tommy Urquhart, the Baptist minister, and there was, of course, the legendary David Patterson, Robert MacLeod.
And there was the OMF conference.
The OMF conference, it was there. It was just remarkable. And then the other thing you're saying about like Ross, and God bless Ross, he's been ill the past few while, but he's still with us. But people used to say to me, so I did a lot just talking with people. I guess people would call it evangelism. Oh, I can't go to church because it's full of hypocrites. And my instinctive reaction, because I'm a little bit combative, was, well, you should come along and join us. You fit well in, But then I started saying, yeah, you're right. Do you know any people who are not? And invariably, they'd go, Ross, Big Donald, Margaret, Angus, wee Margaret. Same people. Lived consistently in that village. They were godly people. They were, lorry driver, carpet fitter.
And normal people. Yeah. They weren't bizarre. They weren't weird.
1 or 2 were weird. Most churches, first of all, will get a little bit of weirdness because that's who you attract.
But there's good weird and bad weird.
Yeah, well, but also, you will attract that. But what you can't do is have a church that's full of weird. And the thing with Brora was, it was working class. It was, can I tell you that? Yeah, I'll tell you the story why, because it's true, so I can't be sued for it. One time, I buried a guy who died because he went home at night drunk and ironed his shirt while he had it on, and he died of burns.
Okay.
So, right, I'm doing the funeral, and I go home, and Annabelle said to me, oh, why can't we have any normal people? And I said, you mean middle class, don't you? You snob, kind of stuff. And she said, well, yeah, kind of. It'd be nice. So anyway, next Sunday, lo and behold, an Edinburgh lawyer turns up. Somebody who practiced law in Edinburgh, brought a holiday home in Brora, used to go to St. Giles Cathedral here, and she and I became friends. She was very political. She'd sit in church and cry and everything. And then one day I got a phone call from her. David, can you come around? So I went round. I said, I've got something to tell you. I'm going to be in the newspaper tomorrow. I'm going to be headline in the Daily Record. And I said, why? She said, well, because I'm the SNP candidate here. And the Sun is about to come out as pro-SNP. The Record have had this story on me for a while. They're going to make me head. And I said, what's the story? She said, well, actually, I used to be a member of the Stornoway Rugby Club. My dad was, I'm actually a man. Well, I was a man. And
who transitioned?
This is transitioning 35 years ago.
Okay.
So I was always ahead of the curve with this kind of stuff.
Transgender before.
So I had a transgender in Brora.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the great thing about that was she said to me, and I'll say she because that's what I got used to. I think I'll go and make a cup of tea. Yes, please. I was thinking, they didn't teach me about this in the college. Anyway, when I went back to Annabelle and told her, Annabelle said, oh, for goodness sake, didn't you know? Have you not seen her hands? So I called my elders and said, listen, guys, you better come round. This is going to be in the paper tomorrow. Sandra comes to our church. What are you going to do? And this, to me, was working class, godly common sense. Ross looked at me and said, what's the problem? I said, well, do you not see a problem? He said, no. She's a screwed up sinner who needs Christ the same as everybody else. I said, okay, Ross, fair enough. What happens if she's converted and wants to become a member? And we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. No difference. He says, we just carry on. We welcome, we pray. And I thought, do you know this? You're exactly right. And that's exactly what happened. And, you know, I remember working through that issue. In fact, when we went to Dundee, she came down to Dundee and ended up going to jail. But that's another story. We won't go there. So that's Brora. Look, Brora. Ken Larter, who was in Brora, he came back one time. Now, Ken went from Brora to work with, in effect, gay prostitutes
in Philadelphia
with AIDS. That's what he was doing. And Ken came back, and you imagine sitting there, and one of the little old ladies said something to him about, oh, how tough is it in Philadelphia? And he went, I ain't seen nothing in Philly that I didn't see in Brora.
Yeah.
And you know this, I agree with him.
Do you know, that leads on to another thing. Do you think ministry's too siloed today? Folk talk about schemes, rural, urban, you know, is there a sense in which church is church, or are we too siloed?
Oh, we're way too siloed. Church is people. So I've discovered this. I mean, I'm not very good with systems and schemes, but I think I can work with people. I mean, some people are really annoying, but...
I'm surprised at that, but carry on.
But, you know, look, how will I explain this? Okay, let me explain this way. In Dundee, there was a student came, and we had this old lady who was, you know, not very well and really struggled with a lot of things. And this young student, she was training to be a doctor. She came in, and I saw her on her knees speaking to the old lady after church. And I thought, yeah.
That's church.
And I'll give you another example. You know this guy, Murdo Welly?
Yeah.
Right? Murdo MacLeod from Dunvegan.
Yeah.
Murdo Welly, nicknamed because he was alleged to have worn his dog collar when he was in the garden in his wellies, right?
Okay.
So he retired to Dundee. Very, very traditional. He and I, opposite ends of the spectrum, became one of my elders. I loved him to bits. I think he probably found me as exasperating as I found him at times. But he was wonderful. And because of this, because he cared for people. So one day, a Norwegian punk came into our church. Black earrings, long black coat, mascara, the whole thing. And who's the guy who's speaking to him? Murdo. And I thought, oh, no. This is like... And Murdo actually did say to him, oh, well, how is your soul? And the guy actually looked at his shoes.
Yeah.
You know, he's going, I'm thinking, oh, this is the absolute clash. You know, you should, you know, let's get someone trendy and like Dave Meredith or something, you know. And I thought that this is, I cannot possibly see how that could work. Next Sunday, Norwegian punk was back and he came up to me and he said, where's the old man? I said, oh, Murdo. He said, yeah. I said, he's over there. Why? He said, because he said, he talked to me last week and he asked me about my family and I told him about my granny who was sick. And the first thing he did today, he came up to me and said, "How's your granny? I've been praying for her all week."
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, it's a cliche, but that's the language of love.
Okay.
You know, the guy adored Murdo for that.
Right. So, I mean, we're talking about revitalization here, and I think what you're saying is really simple. You preach the Bible, you open up God's word, you're friendly with people, you treat people with respect and humanity. To use one of my favorite phrases, it really is not rocket science. Ministry's not complex, is it?
No. So I'm from a farming background. The biblical analogy about sheep are the thickest of farm animals.
Well, I would disagree with that.
No, pigs are the most intelligent. Cows come next. Sheep are way down the bottom. They smell. They go off in herds.
They can't see behind themselves, and they are on their feet within 2 minutes of being born.
Yeah, but that still doesn't make them intelligent. I know plenty of people on their feet who are not that intelligent. But the shepherd cares for them. And I remember actually being here, Clement Graham. Remember Clement Graham?
Yes, absolutely.
Again, a guy who I crossed swords with a lot, but he forgave me because he was a Rangers.
Yes, he was from Tain, and you'd gone to Tain Royal Academy.
And he was a Rangers fanatic. I came into the college here once, and I had a motorbike, and I had Ranger scarves around, and Christine, who was the secretary, was trying to get me in trouble, and she said to Principal Graham, as I still call him, "Isn't that terrible, the way students are coming dressed nowadays?" And he saw my Ranger scarf and he said, "I see nothing wrong with his attire." Yeah. But he said that to us here in one class. He did pastoral theology, and he said, "Don't go in like a new broom, sweep everything clean. Love the people for 4 or 5 years. And after that, you get away with murder."
Yeah, I mean, I still remember Clement Graham's stuff. He spoke such wisdom. I mean, at the time, I think, why didn't I go to Westminster or RTS to get some funky guy who, quoted Schaeffer, who was kind of in it that day? Why am I stuck with this? But the longer, just the guy's wisdom is just beyond value. Okay, so there's so many sidebars arising out of this. Before we get to Dundee, you spoke there, it was a little aside, but I want to tease it out a bit, the word of knowledge, the prophetic thing. Yeah. Someone asked me last week, "Are you a cessationist of me?" And I said, it's complicated. It really is complicated. In terms of revelatory stuff, tongues and all that stuff, I'm really not into. But there is a supernaturalism, isn't it? And even we, especially we in the Reformed, Presbyterian tradition, Calvin, Knox, Chalmers, are we cessationists?
No, because we're Calvinists. And if you're a Calvinist, you believe that God is sovereign. God won't contradict himself in his word. So if in God's word it said, "Look, there shall be no more healings, there shall be no more miracles, there shall be no more," well, fine, then yeah, I'm a cessationist. But it doesn't say that. But neither does it say what the charismatics say. So I tend to be, look, if it's of God, it will prosper. I don't have any problem, particularly with spiritual gifts. I remember an Indonesian guy coming to us, and he said, "Can I speak in tongues?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, providing you do it scripturally, decently, and in order, at the back of the church, and there's an interpreter." Well, of course, that was not going to happen. But we did have things. So I remember, you're preaching through the Bible, and I remember preaching through 1 Corinthians, and it was James, and the prayer of faith will make a sick person well, and you anoint with oil, and so on. So I was kind of winding my elders up a wee bit, and I said, "Why don't we do this?" And Big Donald looked at me and said, "Come here, come to my house." And I went to his house and he pointed up. And I looked at the top of the kitchen cabinet and he said, "What do you see there?" And I said, "It's a bottle of olive oil." He said, "Yeah, that's our anointing oil." I said, "You do that?" He said, "Yes. We did it to Ross's daughter and she was cured of cancer." He said, "We really believe that." He said, "But we follow the pattern. People ask us, we don't announce it, we don't have healing services. But if people ask us to go and pray with them, that's what we do." And I followed that pattern ever since. I do that. I would go and pray with people. Sometimes if we do it with the elders, I would anoint with oil.
Everybody from like Free Presbyterians to Charismatics believe that God can heal.
Yeah. So but claiming that he will is a very different thing.
Yeah.
So I know we had one guy who has just died. You remember Hugh Henderson?
Yeah.
Well, his son died in tragic circumstances, and there were people in his church at the time he was charismatic who were, pronouncing healing.
Yeah.
This is claiming healing, and it didn't happen, and it was devastating. So I'm very wary about that, but I would always pray for the sick. And actually, personally, I think I myself was healed at one point as well. So
I remember that.
Yeah,
I remember that. I actually, and you know this, you were in a coma, and I went down to Dundee to see you, and Annabelle and I were actually talking about your funeral.
Yeah, I believed you prepared my sermon, which I'd really like to hear now.
The eulogy was phenomenal. But in all seriousness, you were in a coma for days. You were just out of it. I mean, while we're on that, this is real stream of consciousness stuff. What did you learn from that experience? You changed afterwards. Tell me what you learned from that.
So so I'll say this because I don't often say it, and that experience was revelatory in lots of ways. Two aspects to it. I'll maybe mention. One was. Well, three actually. One was there was a spiritual warfare side to it, which was phenomenal. And I won't go into detail about that. The other was that I was being interviewed by the BBC. I had quite a lot of media engagement at that point. And I was being interviewed by the BBC. I think it may have been Sally Magnuson actually afterwards. And she said, she couldn't resist it. She said, "What happened when you nearly died? Did you go to heaven and St. Peter turn you back?
Did you see the light?"
And I said, "No, nothing like that." And she said, "Oh, that's a shame. You'd have made a fortune on the New York Times bestsellers list. Such cynicism, but also true." And she said, "Did anything change?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And then I said, "Yeah, it did." She said, "What changed?" I said, "Well, I've always believed heaven and hell, and we need to be saved, and eternity is real. I've always believed that, but the difference now is I feel it."
Okay.
So that was, and it's funny, my surgeon, who was a Muslim, Mr. Shimmy, said to me before I left hospital, I think I was in hospital about 3 months, he said, "David, you're in an enormously privileged position." He said, "You've gone right to the edge where most human beings don't go, and you are now able to speak from experience." So I think that now there's one other aspect to it. I was lying, I was out of the ICU, I was in the high dependency. And I think at that point I'd been in hospital 2 months. And as far as I was aware, it was 2 days. And I'm lying there and I'm nil by mouth. My muscles had all entropied. The guy across
nil
me...
by mouth, that's a first, but carry on.
And the guy across from me had... huge basket of fruit and I wanted to kill him. I couldn't touch anything. And I'm lying there and I couldn't even read and I couldn't write. And I think I'd memorized Ephesians or something. So I'd been preaching through Ephesians. So basically I just lay there and wrote lots of sermons in my head. And as I was lying there, I heard, this is really hard to explain. It wasn't a literal voice and it wasn't an image, but it was a very definite two things. And I think this is the only time this has happened to me ever in my life. One was, I felt really strongly God was saying, this is a test of whether St. Peter's is your church or my church. Mm-hmm. And that really hit me. And then and by the way, the answer was, it was his church, because when I went back, it had continued to grow and develop and was doing fine without me. Mm-hmm. And then the other was, I suddenly realized I'd almost died. I didn't know that till that point. Nobody really told me. And I just realized, wait a minute, you almost died. You've been in here a long time. And then I got this impression, is how I would put it, rather than anything else. You're going to get out of here. And whether it's for 5 months, 5 years, or 50 years, it's none of your business. But you will teach my word. Okay. That's what you will do. And I've never, ever forgotten that. I kind of was doing that anyway, but that was a very, very powerful impression. Now, you could argue, oh, that's just in your head, but I reckon God uses what's in your head anyway, so okay. I don't care.
It's good to do things together, and what better thing to do than pray? Engage 2026 is an initiative of the Free Church of Scotland, where we're asking people to pray intentionally, expectantly and boldly for 10 people, praying that they will come to know the Lord Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour. These people may be our family, they may be our friends, people we work for, even national figures, maybe radically people we don't even like. But prayer can change them, but it can also change us. So please join with us in this exciting venture of Engage 2026.
So let's go to, you were in Brora for 6 years and then you moved on to St. Peter's Free Church in Dundee. Very different context, very different church in many ways. I think it would be fair to say that the church was on its last legs. It really was in desperate condition. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what you found and what your thinking was in these early days?
So, when I went there was 7 people and 4 of them left.
Okay.
So D. James Kennedy calls that a Scottish revival.
Yeah.
Right? It's a church that officially was registered to see 1,000 people. It was historic church, McShane's church. I remember, the reason I went is maybe this is, so Alec MacDonald phoned me up and said, the minister from Dundee is retiring, being forced out or whatever, we need to. And he said, would you consider coming and revitalizing? They called it, do they still call it church revitalization?
We do, yes.
Okay. So,
it was redevelopment charge in those days.
Okay.
We call it revitalization now, but redevelopment.
Redevelopment.
Charge.
So would you come and redevelopment? And I said no. And then Alex said to me, but you're the guy who stands up at assembly. This is what happens when you've got a big mouth and says, we need to be in the cities. This is Scotland's 4th city. And I said, okay, look, Alec, my conscience was bothering me. I said, I'll come down, but not on a Sunday. I'll come down at the prayer meeting on a Wednesday, meet with the people. We'll see what happens. But no way am I leaving Brora. We were very happy. We lived in this big manse with a golf course out one, the sea out the other. Congregation doubled. Spiritual life was wonderful. So we went down to, I went down, and to cut a long story short, I'm standing there with the elder and with Alec MacDonald, and the elder said to me, what would you do if you came here? And I said, look, the days of I'm not a great preacher, your idea of me coming in and all these free church people will start coming. No, they won't. Mm-hmm. They don't exist, or if they do exist, they've left. We've got to start from scratch. We've got to evangelize. We've got to reach out to, for example, the local skinheads. Mm-hmm. At that moment
and a local skinhead walked in.
Yeah, I remember him because he had a big scar down his cheek. And there was this kind of silence because it's through a side door he came in.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I looked at them, and they're looking at me in absolute astonishment. I mean, it was, as Alex said, it was like a chill down his spine from that. And I said to him, can I help you? He says, is there some kind of church meeting here? And I said, yeah, there is. I said, are you looking for a church meeting? He says, I met this lassie in a park. And this was a girl called Judith who was planning coming from a Baptist church to support because she'd heard I was coming. And he fancied her, and chatted her up. And she wisely stayed away, by the way. So he came and I spoke to him and says, you ever been to church before? And he says, no. I said, all right, in you go. He went in. Then a guy came in who was a local drug addict. And by the night in prayer meeting was like normally 4 or 5 people. We had 20 people. And I went in and I said to Alec, as I'm going in, what am I going to do? I was just going to be polite and read from the King James and do their traditional way. I says, it's your call. I said, well, I can't do that. These people have never been to church before. It's at least 3 people there. And so I said, look, I went to the front and said, look, I'm going to read something to you from the Bible and I'm going to explain how God impacts the city. And anyway, the guy said to me afterwards, I was going to walk out when I saw the girl wasn't there. But your wife sat beside me, Annabelle sat beside him, which was great. And she and I have always worked together. And he says, I've never heard anything like that before. Never heard anything like that. And he says, I'm going to jail tomorrow. I said, how do you know that? He says, no, I'm going to jail. I'm going for 7-8 years. So you're talking violent assault. And I just thought, I have to come here. How is that not a sign? How is that? It's just impossible. And we went there, and I had no plan. So in current church terms, I would be an absolutely anomaly. This was literally my plan. People don't believe this, but I thought, I am going to teach the Bible, love the people, and see what happens.
That's a plan.
Yeah, well, kind of. But it was just that basic. And right from the beginning, I remember the old elder. I remember this man came in with a regimental tie, and remember the Colonel, Donald Matheson? He'd come down to help us. We had more assessor elders than we had congregation, and he was one of them. And he recognized the regimental tie and spoke to him, and the guy came in, and my elder turned to me and he said, "Oh, the magic's happening." I said, "It's not magic, Donald, it's the Holy Spirit." But yeah. And it did. I mean, it was slow, painfully slow. What people don't realize is we were there for 18 years before one Christian family came to us.
That's interesting. And remember also that, there are visionaries. The denomination had, at that time, the chair of the board of trustees. And traditionally, the chair of the board of trustees is a fairly scary individual. He's always he's always an elder. And so this was John O'Sutherland, right?
Yeah.
Lovely guy, though. And wasn't his vision to buy St. Peter's? And everybody at the time thought, why would we buy this 1,000-seater for a congregation of, it was 15 then. Yeah. So, he bought it, and while you were there, it was renovating. It is absolutely beautiful. So tell us just a little bit about the Dundee story, even your philosophy of preaching, if you've got a philosophy of preaching. What is it?
So my philosophy of preaching is this: don't treat people like idiots. So don't dumb down. That was my first rule was I'm not going to dumb down. And somebody said, "Oh, you're going to try and reach the students." I said, "No, I'm not. Because students can be as thick as anybody else. That's not the issue. But the point is, we're going to take it seriously. But you contextualize." So I would read the Courier. I would walk around the streets talking to people. I would use local history illustrations. I got to know things like the history of Timex or whatever. And so the application was really strong. So you would teach that. And then I remember that the mornings grew slowly. Within a year, we were about 40. And the evenings we were going to close.
And you're still in this
big building.
Gloomy, dark lighting, as I recall. Dark stained pews.
Yeah, so it made me look like Orange Man. I mean, so I was Donald Trump before Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Not in most ways. Actually, this is quite illustrative as well. I remember John Mackay saying, "You should write down all this stuff because nobody is going to believe you." First Sunday evening I was there. Now, traditional free church. My first Sunday evening in Brora, I think it was about 400 because people from all around come.
After the induction,
Yeah, after the induction. You turn up the evening after the induction. That was the tradition.
It was even less than normal.
Well, Dundee, there was 15.
Yeah.
And in this building that could see, I reckon it could see about 800. So there's 50, and they're dotted around. And my son stands up and says to his mom in a Brora accent, "There's no people. Where's all the people?" And I thought, oh my goodness, he's right. And then this lovely old lady, Jean Graham, who's just one of these saints, had given up. And she said, "I don't know why David's come here. We're finished. We're 6 months closed." So that first service, I remember this. I remember saying, right. I said, "Come here. I need to ask you something. Please don't sit at the back. You're Presbyterians, so I can't ask you to sit at the front. That's too much. But can you sit in the middle? And can you at least pretend that you know each other?" And I said, "Because we're never going back to the hall. The hall was 1950s curtains, pictures of dead ministers on the wall. We are not going back there. John O'Sutherland, the trustees, have supported us. They've given me 4 years. We're going to turn the heating on. We're going to blast it out. We're going to open the doors. That's what we're going to do. We're going to let people know that we're here." And I remember this lady saying out loud to me in the thing, she said, "Oh, but I'll get a creak in my neck if I have to look up at the pulpit." I said, "I ain't preaching from the pulpit. I'm preaching from the organ console." There was an organ console, and I said, "I'll preach from there until we get about 100. And I said, "Then maybe we'll open the balcony." And they looked at me, and I said to them, "So this is, if you want a philosophy, this was my philosophy." I said, "All right, you people need to really understand what I'm saying here. I'm not saying I can get you 100 because I can't. So forget me getting you 100. I'm not even saying that God is going to get you 100. I said, I don't know that. But if you don't believe that God can, then walk out the door, close it, we're done. You have to believe he can.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Mm-hmm.
And from that moment, they began to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Just that handful of people. And then new people came in. And then, I mean, we went through so many ups and downs. But it grew.
Okay, so let me push back on that. A few weeks ago, you wrote an article somewhere about numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I took a somewhat different position to you. So now you're telling me that you had a number in your head. To me, you were always this guy. In fact, you inspired me in many ways. Always have a number in your head. And yet you're saying it's bad to have a number. So, what's right? Are both right?
So look, I understand you're a Glasgow Rangers supporter, so subtlety doesn't really come into your vocabulary and nuance. But here's how this works. So I've got a number in my head about where I'm at just now, Scots Kirk in Newcastle. And I'm thinking, when we reach 120, we're going to 2 services. That's in my head. That's what I'm thinking.
That's a strategy. That's a vision.
Yeah, except this is it. What I'm not saying is, when people put a number saying this is what we can do and we can grow, we can't do 10% conversion rate, but we can do a 5%. I'm saying, whoa.
Yeah.
Theologically, that's off the wall crazy.
Yeah.
It also doesn't help. 5% for me is one person. I don't want one person. Here's my thing. So if I go to Dundee, my responsibility in Dundee, so I think at McShane had a parish of 4,000 people. 1,500 of whom came to his church, 1,500 of whom went to other churches. McShane preached a phenomenal sermon about the 1,000 people who didn't go to church and how we were all responsible for them. And that's the way that I think. I think, all right, how do we reach the people around the church? And then because of the way that society is today, how do we reach the different network communities? I'm never going to put a figure on it in a public forum and say, right, we're aiming for 100, 200, 500 or whatever. But what I'm saying is that I'm planning. So the statistic, if your church is 80% full, it's 2 full. So you saw this in Smithton when you got offered a building and the farmer withdrew his offer or whatever.
Yeah.
And you ended up with a much better building, which was... We saw this when we redid our building. We were going to do a screen across the back to have a fellowship area. So we wanted to keep on budget, and the architect said to us, remove the screen. It's 80,000 quid. And this architect was not a Christian. And I said, why? He said, no. He said, Dave, you're going to grow bigger than this.
Yeah.
You're going to have to take the screen down when you grow. And I said, we're a congregation of 80. He said, yeah, you're not going to stay there.
Yeah.
And you know this, he was right. And also, we were at that time a psalm singing only church, but we future-proofed.
Yeah.
We set up all the audio stuff. We were ready to go when the free church changed.
Yeah.
You know, man, were we ready to go?
Yeah. I mean, denomination revival, that's another podcast, how the denomination changed, and you were one of the architects of that. I mean, from St. Peter's, you and there was one pretty, church in really bad condition. And now I've noted down here, we've got Montrose, Broughty Ferry, Charleston, and St. Andrews. Arguably, all these 4 come out of your vision and various elements of it. In Fife, we had Kirkcaldy, we now have Leven, and we have Dunfermline. And now, again, another one of your visions was, I don't know if you remember it, the Millennium, you stood up at the Assembly and you challenged the General Assembly to go for church planting. I forget, but you had a number. Later...
one a year was my number.
Yeah, one a year. Later, in 2017, we come up with about this 30 by 30, which has actually been phenomenally successful. Yeah. We didn't get to 30, but we've got to 18.
Yeah.
Do you regret giving the 1 a year figure? Do you think the 30 by 30 is a great vision?
The 1 a year figure was a little bit sarcastic. I remember Douglas McMillan saying to me afterwards, well done, David. He said, I underestimated you. He said, I've always told you I told you not to speak at your first assembly, and you did. And he said, you've always spoken at every assembly ever since. And he said, that was great how you managed to get that through. And then he said to me something that was devastating. He said, they'll never do it. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to try. He said, everyone's going to applaud and stamp their feet.
But it started something.
Well, it did.
It did start something.
And,
which is better than nothing.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is this. When I went to Tayside, so you're talking, let's say, Tayside Northeast 5. In the Free Church, Perth was maybe 40 people. I don't think it was much more than that. We were a handful, so 50 people.
Yeah.
When we left, I calculated that there were over 1,100 people attending free churches in that area. Not all my doing, it's the Lord's doing and marvellous in our eyes. But there was a vision thing. So Montrose, for example, Montrose happened because, it's all personal. Lady came to the church. I said, where are you from? She said, I'm from Montrose. I said, why are you here? She said, I'm just so fed up with the local churches and I really like your emphasis on Bible teaching. I said, okay, let's meet. So she said, do you think I should come? And I said, where do you go for your shopping? She said, Dundee. Where do you go to cinema? Dundee. I said, okay, you come to church with us. But it's not ideal. I said, the other question I asked her was, would you take your husband to the local church? She said, no, absolutely no. I said, okay, you come to us. But you come to us on the understanding we're going to plant in Montrose. And I remember people going, oh, don't be stupid. You're never going to plant in Montrose. Same thing with St Andrews, by the way. We planted in St Andrews. That's never going to happen. Broughty Ferry, that wasn't our plan. It was the Church of Scotland that came.
Yeah.
But we built up relationships with them.
Yeah.
I didn't build up relationships with them to get them to try and come to the Free Church. But when things went sour in the Church of Scotland, that's how they naturally came. Charleston, I was in Charleston yesterday, and I'm just so encouraged by this because... and by the way, if anyone's listening, you think, oh, this guy's always encouraged. I used to get manically depressed about stuff. You sow in tears. I used to walk around Charleston, literally prayer walk.
Which is a housing scheme.
It's a housing scheme.
Dundee for our listeners.
And I want to do this. We need to plant a church here. We need to plant a church here. I had people saying, we could never go into kind of housing scheme areas. And I was there yesterday, and okay, it was a baptism. It was a bit special. Simon, who's recording here, was there as well. And it was over 80 people.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. And I saw, you sow in tears, you reap with songs of joy. And it's my son that's doing it. And I had thought, I have to do this.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Yeah. God doesn't need me.
Yeah.
But I think, as you get older, you learn not to be falsely humble. And I think you try not to be arrogant either, but I think I'm genuinely a visionary. I think I genuinely see things, and look, some of them don't work out. But remember Mark Hateley, who played for Rangers, he scored a goal against Leeds in the European Cup, and it was an unbelievable, he just belted it. It flew in from like 30 yards away or whatever. And somebody said to him, did you mean that? And he says, if you don't buy a ticket, you can't win the lottery. And I'm not saying it's a lottery with God, but I'm saying if you don't try,
yeah. I mean, I heard yesterday that Charleston was amazing, not just the numbers, but the culture.
Yeah.
And that's good. We've just got a few minutes left. Yeah. Let's move on. Chapters, our ministries are like chapters in books. They come, the Dundee chapter closed naturally, and you moved on to Australia. Let's just skip the Sydney years just now. That's for another day. You went to work in Sydney for a few years, and then you started to work in Newcastle, New South Wales. Again, tell me what you found there. It's another revitalization challenge.
Okay, so to summarize it, to give you plenty of material for other things, 27 years in Dundee. There were push and pull reasons for us leaving, but our time had gone. How do I know that now? Because 7 years later, St. Peter's is flourishing.
Thriving,
and you, as pastor in Smithton, people would think we would be almost glad if it declined because it would show how valuable we were. No, it shows that it was God's work.
Both Smithton and St. Peter's have thrived. Yeah. Someone said you only know you're successful when you leave.
Yeah, and so that's thrilling to me. I can't go over how thrilling it is.
That's a younger generation.
Yeah.
They've got it in spite of everything.
Yeah. Well, it's like, they've been handed to it on a plate.
Of course. We did the hard work.
We did the blood, sweat and tears. Absolutely. Two grumpy old men here, So I went to Sydney.
Pearson and McLeod are just cruising,
I'm not going to skip by the Sydney years because I went to help with Sydney Anglicans, and basically the bottom line is my ministry is to revitalize poor, broken churches. I ain't a big church guy. I can't play the game. I can't do I'm too blunt.
You don't do the politics.
I don't do the politics. People, like in the southern US, I remember Ligon Duncan going to me, came only me once, and he says, Dave, sit down. And I sat down. He said, you got to understand something about us southern boys. I said, yeah. He said, you were at a conference, weren't you? He said, pastor sat beside you, yeah. He said, tell me your whole heart. He said, yeah. He said, you did, didn't you? I said, yeah. He said, we don't mean it. He's still in therapy.
Yeah, some of our listeners will be familiar with Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana. Mm-hmm. He was described as all the charm of a southern gentleman with the venom of a snake.
So, anyway, to be honest, Sydney didn't work out for me. Annabelle gets mad with me if I say that I failed. I went there I have an idea about evangelism. I went there to do it. Largely didn't work. I got called to Newcastle. They said, we need in Hamilton Presbyterian Church, 20 elderly people. We need a pastor evangelist. We don't have any. Literally, we don't have any. We can think of a Chinese guy in the whole of the New South Wales. And I don't know if that was true or not. I wasn't going to go. I gave the job description to Annabelle, my wife, obviously, and she said, that's what you do. So we went, 20 people. I said to them within 5 years, I like being direct. Nearly all of you are going to be in care homes or dead.
Okay.
This is not going to work. I said, I'm taking over leading the service, and I'm going to preach for 30 minutes. And there's a standard, I would say, Sydney evangelicalism way of doing things. You start up another congregation. And I said, no, I'm old school Presbyterian. So we'll have Sunday, morning and evening. It won't be a separate congregation. The morning has begun to grow. To me, it reminds me so much of St. Peter's. The people we're getting are people who've stopped going to church and are pretty broken, or people who've never gone to church. The promise of, how will I put it, whole families who are heavily involved in other churches coming to us was never, ever fulfilled. It was never going to happen. People weren't going to leave. When you've got no kids, no young people, virtually no functional couples, why would anyone come? And yet God has been sending people, and people have been converted. And we had a double baptism a couple of weeks ago. It's quite exciting. We're in the midst of an area that's pretty rough. In some ways, I've been assaulted twice. There's a guy just come out of the jail for assaulting me when I go back. So
I thought it'd be one of the elders.
Yeah. Well, all the elders have gone. I've only got one elder. So I'm trying to establish an eldership and you go back to the philosophy of revitalization. For me, it's very, very simple. I preach the word and I see what happens. And virtually everyone, when they came in Dundee and said, what are you doing? They would go, oh, yeah, we got that. I said, no, you don't. Because you're so this is where I have the thing about the numbers. Don't predetermine what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to be a whole bunch of Malaysian Chinese come to you. You don't know that. You can't plan for that. You don't know who God is going to send. I was praying for a young guy to come and help with evangelism, and I got an 80-year-old. I did get a young guy who came and was trained as a Presbyterian minister and was like Timothy to me, and then he did so well that he got called away by another church. But since he left, our congregation has continued to grow. And I just thought, no. This is what I'm saying. This is in God's hands. Up until about 4 months ago, I would have said, my jacket's on a sugarly nail. Do you know that? Translate that.
Absolutely.
I thought I could be out here in a year's time. I could be fired, basically, because I'd really gambled in a spiritual sense, absolutely everything. I said, this is what we're doing. This is how I introduced Psalms.
Not exclusively, of course.
No, having introduced hymns to the Free Church, I'm now introducing Psalms to the Presbyterian Church in New South Wales. No offense to those of you who in New South Wales who already use it. But to be honest, it's thrilling. Because like I saw yesterday in Charleston, I think the gospel's for the poor. I think the gospel's for the rich. I think the gospel's for everybody.
I love that.
And I don't care. It's there's a guy came in. So this I hope this isn't boasting, but there was a guy came in and he he was quite clearly camp stroke gay, you know. And I joked to him and said, "Are you a hairdresser?" And he said, "Oh, yes, absolutely." You know, I thought, okay.
Doesn't drive a Mazda MX-5, no.
And he came because his partner, male partner, had died. And anyway, during the course of the sermon, I used an illustration. I said something about hairdressing. He came up to me afterwards and said, "Did you do that deliberately?" And I said, "Yes, I did. I did do it deliberately." And he said, "Well, I'm coming back." You know, and I just thought, I wasn't having a go at him. I wasn't, you know, it was, in fact, the very opposite. I don't compromise on anything. I mean, we get people come along and they say, "Oh, this is great, this is great." And then they go, "Hang on a minute, you really believe this? You really teach this?" I say, "Yeah, and I ain't compromised. I ain't changing." You know, and people push you. They push you to change. Even Christians push you to, hey, tone it down. Don't. And I'm not aggressive in the sense of, you know, having a go at people. I just think that everybody needs to hear Christ. And no, I'll give you an example. Another. So this, I don't know how this happens to me. I go away down to Hobart for a Sunday. I come back, phone call. Woman says, "I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, who are you?" She said, "No, I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, come round." So she comes round. Catholic lady, local lady. She said, "My son came to your church last Sunday." I said, "Okay." And, you know, he doesn't go to church, nothing. He's 40 years old. And he said it was, you know, he thought it was a little bit judgmental, but he enjoyed it and everything. And I said, "Okay." And then he went and hung himself off the back of a ute on Thursday. And I thought I was going to get, your church pushed him over the edge. You know, that's what I thought. I was braced. I was ready for it. And instead, we had this long conversation. And then she said to me, "If my son had met you, he wouldn't have killed himself." And I said, "Oh, no, no, no. Don't put that burden on me and don't put it on yourself." I said, "I have looked at your son's Spotify and the last 5 songs were all Christian songs. Something was going on." And then she showed me a book. You wouldn't believe this. This Catholic guy. And he, like, uber left-wing, progressive, etc., etc. He had this old book about the Reformation, illustrated, which as a boy from 8, he'd always loved, and she brought it to me. And then she said to me, "Can you do the funeral?" And I said, "You're Catholic. You've got the priests lined up. You know, it's a big deal." She said, "No, you're doing it." I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And she's lovely. She's been coming to us ever since. But part of me, and I'm saying, I'm allowed to say this publicly because she and I are working on something to do with him. His name was Luke. I never ever met him, but I exist for the Lukes of this world. That's how I would put it. I would say, in a sense, she's wrong, but in another sense, she was right, because if he got to hear the gospel, that's where there's some hope. I understand why people commit suicide, let's put it that way, because I think in one sense they're being honest. But I think there is hope in the gospel, and that is for absolutely everybody. Whether it's, we had drug addicts in Dundee, but look, your respectable middle-class people are often people who go and commit suicide as well. So that's not and so for me, if you're talking church revitalization, that's what you're doing. So I do a lot of social commentary as well. And I did that in Dundee, and people think, "Oh, what are you trying to do? You know, are you culture wars?" Listen, I was doing culture wars 40 years ago. You guys are behind the times. It's not culture wars, it's spiritual wars. And I use those things as, long before the internet, well, I was going to say before it was invented, you know, but I'm like Al Gore, I invented the internet. But it's clickbait. I mean, I put things out. I've written 2 articles, the local newspaper in Newcastle. Because of that, people have come to church. I comment on things from a Christian perspective, and I always say, yeah, but there's more.
So you have what I used to call controlled explosions. They may seem explosions, but there's a purpose for them.
Look, they are...
You don't like the word controlled.
Well, yeah, so I don't. I mean, in fact, somebody said to me, look, the trouble with David, I've had 2 complaints about, well, I had lots of complaints about me in Australia, but I remember 2 guys in particular. One guy said, the trouble with David is he's good at reaching outsiders. How on earth is that trouble? But never mind. And then the other thing I heard was, he's uncontrollable. I don't think that's true. I like working in a team. I can't work on my own. I think there's a biblical methodology. I think you need elders. I stir up the pond. I need people to come in and come alongside people, you know. And funny, Charleston, I thought that yesterday. I thought, yeah, Andy's bringing in people from all different backgrounds. We need Christians who are mature, who will come alongside these people. And that's exactly where we're at in Newcastle. So going back to this whole revitalization thing, you just need a bit of spiritual life. In your preaching, I would say preaching is key. I would say what I would call the biblical organization of your church is key. I also would annoy my Sydney Anglican friends by saying worship is key. And I know, yes, everything we do is worship, but yeah, that's like the people who say, well, I pray all the time. No, you don't. Prayer meetings are really good. And I like the concept of public worship. That's absolutely key. I want people to come in and to experience God and to say, truly God is amongst you. That happened to us in St. Peter's numerous times. I remember the journalist, Kevin McKenna. He came to do a story. I mean, that's another story. We could talk about the media. That's another thing. But anyway, he came to do a story. And at the end of the service, he's standing there and he's on his BlackBerry. So it was a wee while ago. I said, what are you doing? Faxing it or to your editor? He says, no, I'm telling my partner she needs to get up here and hear this. I have never experienced anything like that. That's what he told me. That's what I want. I want people to come to church to go and go, wow. So here, I'll finish with this. I know your good time's gone. This is when you've cracked it in evangelism. It's not when people come to your church because you've done this big campaign or whatever and they come along. It's not even, people wandering off the streets, which is great. I think culturally, there is a cultural moment. I don't think it's revival, but there's a cultural moment right now. But you've really cracked it in evangelism when non-Christians come to your church and then they go away and they say to their friends, you got to come and hear this. Then you are sailing. I've experienced that. I haven't experienced it in Newcastle yet, but I've experienced it 3 times in my life. I want to experience it again before I die. But I'm thinking of McShane going back to Dundee. There was a pamphlet about a woman who came in from one of the pubs to mock him, sat up in the gallery, was converted, and went away and basically come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Mm-hmm. Once you've got that, that's real evangelism. That's what I look for.
What a great place to end. I exist for the looks of this world. David, thank you so much. You've been candid, unedited, just the way it is. That's the way you are. Thank you so much for being here with us in the podcast. We wish you were back in Scotland, but you are today where the Lord wants you to be, and we look forward. We hope you will return one day to this great nation of ours. Listeners, viewers, thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you've enjoyed the podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening to David, and just think about these things. Yes, it is the Word, but it's also the Spirit. Thank you. Have a great day, and tune in again next episode.